Thank you, by the way, for that. We had an intermission, wasn't planned. But we were able to also turn on the AC. That was my fault. I didn't ask to have it turned on in the beginning. But let's go ahead and jump in. We'll start with the last film. Right, this is the world premiere. So, what brought you what brought you to the Los Angeles River? Was it something you were thinking about? Did it come about by living here? I think at this point, around 13 years, maybe 12. What had you be interested in the Los Angeles River?
Well, actually, a friend of mine, Tempe, who worked on the sound for this film, and I were painting by the river one day. And I had been to the river many times, and I always thought it was a very intriguing space. But we were painting landscape by the river, and so we had the opportunity to be there for a few hours, and I was really drawn to the fact that there's just a really rich soundscape that happens if you sit there for a long time. And I thought this is an interesting place to make a film. And also it was like 2021 when people were starting to emerge a little bit from lockdown, and it was a really nice space to be, like a public space to be like among people, but still kind of have a distance. It felt like a place that people were comfortable after that time. So I decided to start filming there, and I was mostly familiar with Frogtown, but there are so many other areas. I mean, the river is 51 miles long, and so I started investigating what were places that people spent the most time along the river. So I actually started all the way up in the valley, and these artists had created a LA River card deck that's kind of just a series of small maps. That was really helpful for me in just kind of assessing what was going on in every kind of zone of the river.
And I know a little bit about you and teaching and working, and you probably crossed this river in different parts of it for years now. And so was part of the thinking, in addition to the soundscape, just the different communities and portraits, because a lot of your films have a lot of portraits, different portraits you could make with all those different communities?
Yeah, definitely. Because the river's so long, it cuts through most of the immigrant communities of Los Angeles. And so that's always been an interest of mine, is to kind of really delve deep into all the different communities that make up the city. But also just because of the arbitrariness of the path of the river, it kind of draws you through communities that you wouldn't maybe traverse otherwise. So I came across a lot of surprises. Like San and I actually took a bike ride from Vernon to Long Beach along the river. And that was the zone where I found Pancho and his friends working with the horses. And so that was a really fortunate encounter, but one I probably wouldn't have found if I wouldn't have found that area of LA. I mean, it's actually kind of more like Long Beach down there, but I wouldn't have found that area had I not been working on this project.
Yeah, it's a film of the county, like Los Angeles County. It traverses so many cities and neighborhoods. It's one of the things I find just really appealing about it, that you get to see that diversity. A lot of your films, especially this one, there's this focus on the almost like mechanical movements, whether it's actions people take, like the horse dancing, and of course the card dealing, which we have also in this film. What interests you about observing, documenting, and also memorializing these kinds of actions and mechanical physical processes?
I guess I never thought of it as mechanical, but I guess I look at it more as gestures, and it's part of just my interest in portraiture. I mean, I usually get drawn to people's faces, first of all, and then through observing faces, I think I observe gestures also, but it's not like I'm starting out thinking of that. And by the way, these are not the same card players as the previous film. These card players are Assyrian, and they are up in Reseda, which is actually right by where I teach right now. So I'm actually going through that park every day during my break from class. So anyway, I mean, it's funny to see those films back to back, but the guys in Birds of a Feather speak Armenian, and they're in Glendale, and the guys in Concrete River are Assyrian. But yeah, just so you know, because it's not clear in the films. Yeah.
But that's one of the things that's, I think, really beautiful, that there's almost like a mapping of Los Angeles County, different communities, and part of that kind of gesture is almost like the compass that's taking us through all those spaces, like the unique gestures. Anything else you'd like to say about what it was like to make Concrete River?
I just was really delighted because it was a kind of a structure to work within, but then it involved a lot of spontaneity too. So the whole film is really through spontaneous encounters. I mean, except for Patrick, I think somehow I found out that you were playing by the river, and I said, I have to put that in my film. But most of the time, people I was encountering were just by chance. I was exploring that part of the river, and I would kind of just approach whoever I wanted to film, and most of the time, people were open to it. But also for that reason, maybe the film doesn't have as much direct address to the camera as some of my previous films. But a lot of times the interactions were quick, and it was also kind of emerging from COVID, so I feel like people were a little leery. But it was, so, I mean, I think if I was to do it again, I would want more interviews or more voices. But it's kind of this film that came from this organic structure of just exploring the river.
Yeah, and your films bring to mind observational cinema, direct cinema, documentary, but it also brought to mind two others. One, Stutz Terkel working, especially the early films, but also John Cage and just Music of Changes and randomness as a structure, especially the last one. And so because they're kind of chance encounters, was that something that you would kind of seize as soon as you saw something, maybe instinctually, or something that interested you? Was it the gestures? What kind of guided you in that kind of random chance encounters approach?
I think most of it was just the people seemed like they had an interesting face, or they were clearly spending time by the river in an intentional way. I would just kind of go approach them, and especially if they were doing something that was kind of active that I felt could be cinematic in some way, I would approach them. If people were speaking a different language, I was always interested in that, just like to get like a diversity of communities that were spending time by the river. But it wasn't so prescribed. It was more, I honestly was just looking for people spending time by the river, because there's actually many stretches where you won't see anyone. There's just like kind of no man's land for miles. And there were many more encounters that maybe I didn't have my camera on me at the time, or like one time I saw 15 fire trucks doing their drills in the middle of the river, which I really wish I could have filmed, but I didn't have my camera that day, so, yeah.
Also, was this after or before you started going to the river, like many people along the Los Angeles River that find it almost like a refuge, like a place to relax? And was that something that happened first, or as you were making it, or after making the film, for you, kind of personally?
I always found it to be an interesting space and a refuge, but I probably didn't go as regularly until I started working on this film. And I also just wasn't aware of all the different environments that might be interesting to visit along the river. Like that whole part in the North Valley and the Sepulveda Pass, where the guy's doing his plank and running up the slope and stuff. I mean, I just wasn't aware of that whole part of the river that's actually kind of wild, the way the part near Frogtown is. So there's a lot of people just taking bike rides and doing hikes and doing birding and all kinds of things that I wasn't aware of until I started making this film.
You want to take questions about Concrete River before I ask about the other question?
You'll just keep it flowing.
Keep flowing?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask some questions of the other films. Well, I guess just before all of them kind of put together, I've never seen them all put together like this. Maybe that was the first time for lots of people. I kind of felt almost like a photo album of the city. And, like the way you see a family photo album, but here it's passerbys, it's people visiting, strangers you meet, sometimes friends, sometimes people you know, but almost like a photo album. And you could like stop and talk about any of these people at any moment, and then you can just keep on flipping. Anything you want to say just about seeing all your films together and how kind of that felt today?
Certain things stuck out. I mean, you always think like, oh, I could make that shot shorter, or there's those kind of things, like nitpicking at your own work. But I think it all kind of made sense to me, seeing it in a trajectory, I guess. I mean, it's clear that I'm really interested in people, and that needs to be kind of the primary focus of my films. But yeah, I don't know. I think I need more time to think about that. But I like what you said about it feels like flipping through a photo album, because I come more from fine art originally before I studied filmmaking, and I've always done portraiture, like drawing and painting. So I think maybe that's partly why my films have that feeling, because I am kind of always accumulating faces or gestures or communities, or I kind of approach things in that way.
And especially in Birds of a Feather, you actually show us your drawing. It's not an album, but your sketchbook, right? And a lot of the people that you filmed before maybe filming them or in the middle of it, you just had sketched them and were thinking about them probably in the way they look and their actions. And you actually physically flipped through it, right? With Birds of a Feather, the language is such a big, more like immersed, it's almost meditative sometimes, right? And in what they're doing, but also the way they're speaking and interacting with each other. What kind of drew you into that community, and also just this immersion in language?
I was gonna make a film about these old Russian guys that played chess in a park called Plummer Park in West Hollywood. That I made some drawings of, but it was a little far from where I lived at the time, and so I didn't get in the habit of going regularly at first. And then a friend told me about another park where that was going on, but with Armenian guys. And this was when I first moved to LA after graduating from CalArts, and I was just kind of exploring my neighborhood. And I had that in the back of my mind that there was this other park nearby where there was this interesting community. And I just was riding my bike one day, and I happened upon the park that my friend had told me about, just totally inadvertently. And I sat at an empty table, and I was just watching all these old guys doing their negotiations, and they're playing, and they're yelling at each other, and it was just great to watch. But I didn't understand what they're saying. And then suddenly a whole group of them came and sat at the table where I was sitting, and I kind of gestured like I can get up, and they're like, nah. It's fine. And it was all through like body language, and then I found out they're Armenian, and my dad's side of the family is part Assyrian. And when they found that out, they were like, "Okay, you're fine. Yeah, we'll let you be here in our space." So, because Armenians and Assyrians have like a common thing that they're an ethnic minority in the Middle East that's Christian, so they get along. Anyway, so I mean, not to say that it was an easy film to make, it was not, but I went there so many times before I ever started filming, and I started just that day when I was sitting at this table with all these guys drawing portraits of them, and they really liked the portraits, because I just felt it was strange to sit at this table and not play cards. I didn't know the game they're playing, I didn't know their language. It became this way that we could kind of communicate, so then I draw, and then I'd bring them copies of the drawings, and they would really like that. And then I just kind of keep doing that. And then after a while, I took photographs. And then eventually I started filming them. I had a friend come to speak Farsi with them, because a lot of them are Farsi speaking, but Armenian. And then I had another friend come to speak Armenian with them. And then, by then I was filming more regularly, but it took a good year of just drawing and going to the park very regularly before I ever started filming.
Yeah, and So there's like a double language component, the diversity of Los Angeles County languages, but then also community languages of art, of gesture, of body language. You're kind of documenting both at the same time.
I just wanted to add that I think just to answer your question about language is that I keep getting drawn to situations where I can't speak the language actually, which is sort of frustrating, but I figure out ways that kind of make people feel at ease, or it seems like they get to feel at ease with me. In this case, it was through the drawings.
Yeah, and it kind of places you in a position where you're driven to be creative with those constraints. And so you find other ways to communicate besides just speaking directly. And that's a really interesting thing that happens. And it happens over and over. It happens in Sweet Oranges. I really love Sweet Oranges. I love seeing it. And you place value on people who often are ignored or marginalized or scapegoated, farm workers. So I know you were living nearby in Valverde. Was this also something that drew you? Did you want to kind of see what kind of communities were nearby where you were living? What kind of drew you to want to make a documentary of farm workers?
I actually got interested in the landscape first, and I was just filming those camera obscura shots, the time lapse. And then every time I would go out to shoot, and I didn't know what I was going to do with that project, I just liked the images. Anytime I went out to shoot, I would see people working, and I thought, I want to know more about these people and their story. And it took a little while to get to be able to film a group of workers that were both open to me filming and also had a supervisor that was open to me filming, because a lot of the people are undocumented, and yeah, it was just a tricky kind of situation in terms of access. But I got lucky in that somebody from Cal Arts has a lemon grove. A professor from Cal Arts has a lemon grove on her property, and she recommended her foreman. And then he said, "Oh, there's an orange pick going on today. You can go." And I thought, okay, let me grab my camera. And so I went out there, and I just got really lucky because the foreman of that crew that I ended up filming a lot was just a young guy who was a cousin of a lot of the guys who were working. And so they kind of were, it was an extended family type of situation. And I think people who pick oranges, the work is really, really hard, but they can choose when, at least that particular crew could choose when they would take a break. So I had also filmed a crew of people picking peppers, and they were much more regulated. Like they could only take a half-hour break, and they're working in the bright sun all day. At least this crew, they could sit under the tree in the shade when they wanted to take a break. And that's not, I mean, it was still really, really difficult work, but I think all those conditions like made it easier for me to film them. But I also just got lucky. I mean, I think it was just a group that sensed that I was sympathetic to them, and I had a whole conversation about what it was like to cross the border with them, and just talk about what American like sort of misconception is of their situation. And but it was another situation where I didn't speak a lot of Spanish then, so I had friends that come with me and translate. But these people were just really comfortable and really generous with their time also. So I really appreciate them. I was Facebook friends with one of them for a long time, and I think he maybe went off and isn't on it anymore or something like that. But I was keeping track of them for a while through him. And there's one that, Blanca, the woman, she lives in Santa Paula. And she was the only one that was actually kind of had a more permanent home here.
I remember when you were working on this, and I remember the peppers in particular, because you and Bertha would come back and you'd smell like peppers. It was really...
Yeah.
Working, that's especially all the films, especially those first four that we saw. This is where I thought about Stutz Terkel and the book Working, and all these vignettes and portraits of people, how they survive with work, how they make it interesting, even if it's repetitive or hard labor, how they make it valuable and memorable for themselves and their communities. So with Sweet Oranges, you have this narrative of what the workers are saying and what they're going to do when they go back home and why they came. And Michoacan is like a character there, which is a state in Mexico, even though we never see Michoacan. And I think that comes from you really absorbing their stories of work. And so, well, anything you want to say just about that, about your interest in work, labor, because you have it in many of these films.
I think I particularly am interested in that as it relates to like an immigrant context, like because most of my films are about workers that are immigrants or got into a particular work because they were immigrants, or maybe have done certain type of work for generations. So, but also I'm drawn to work that is not that didn't change over time. It's like the way people pick oranges is the same way they picked oranges 100 years ago, pretty much. It's not so affected by technology. And same with barbers, same thing. And then some of the people, like even though my more recent films are more about leisure, they're still about people who kind of do the type of work in my previous films, is like what they do in their free time. So yeah, I get always interested in these people who are kind of out of time in a way. So it's not just about the work itself, it's also about like, how does that work relate with history?
And in Fausto and Emilio, you have kind of the work time, but then also the leisure time kind of rolled into it. The waiting time, or even working, but taking your time working,
Yeah.
right? And you got all of that. From there, I get a sense that you kind of learned from them a lot about work. Anything, and also just how to work. Anything you want to say about kind of what you picked up from them too?
Well, first of all, they couldn't be directed at all. Not that I wanted to direct them, but it was not a type of situation where I could do any interviews or really structure the way I was going to shoot. I just had to kind of be there. And that was fine for me. Because they actually were great subjects, because they didn't change in front of the camera at all. They just did what they always do. And I think also, they'd been doing that job for so many years, and they'd been part of like families that had done that job for so many years, and they had all their customers were people that they wanted to go be transported into this other time. Also, it wasn't just about like getting a haircut. It was like they were in a lot of the people who go to them were Italian American, and they were charmed by the whole scene there. So yeah, I mean, I think, but I think in terms of what you asked, these guys came from a generation where work was just so embedded in their identity, and it wasn't even so much, like that's why I think the question I asked Emilio is funny, because he's like never even analyzed if he likes being a barber or not, it's not irrelevant, and but they came from a generation where it's like you get up and go to work, and that's what you do, and that's kind of what kept them going. I mean, Emilio died not that long after I made the film, but Fausto died like years later. He was 90, I think, and I think part of it was just like he went to work every day, so it really kept him going.
I noticed your dad. Is he a regular, or he just went in to so you can also have someone to film?
Yeah, I needed somebody to film that day, so my dad appears. That's not his regular place to get a haircut. Yeah.
But he's in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
And so this film and also something like Wales they're both in and around Cincinnati.
Yeah.
I think we have also, most of your films focus on urban spaces. The Concrete River has urban spaces, and then almost like these other spaces that are kind of beyond that, kind of magically around the river. But something like Wales also has a rural spaces, and it's also like Fausto and Emilio about Cincinnati. I really was get kind of shocked whenever I see that last image where the sky, it's flipped upside down and the sky looks like an ocean, and the trains kind of give the gesture of Wales. But what So this is a bit of a different setting, more of a rural setting. Say a little bit about that kind of landscape, because a lot of your films are portraits, but this is clearly a landscape film.
It's actually in the middle of the city. It's a big train yard behind the old train station in Cincinnati. So you actually can still take a train from Chicago or to Chicago at 4 in the morning from Cincinnati at this old train station. But anyway, there's this big train yard. I think it ranks among one of the biggest in the country. And I grew up fairly close to there, and I would often ride my bike past it, and I have a bunch of friends that were interested in abandoned buildings, and so we would often go to these old industrial spaces. Cincinnati has this whole history of like foundries, and that was one of the main industries, but it's like kind of has this history of heavy industry, and a lot of the structures of the heavy industry are still there, even if they've been abandoned or are crumbling. And so I grew up accustomed to that as like a backdrop, but you can also hear the sound of the trains. It's actually the sound of the trains. Basically the tracks are getting squeezed, so when the trains get sent down, like one train comes in and then it needs to be redistributed, so the people up on the control room are sending different cars down different tracks. So in order for them not to go so fast, they squeeze the tracks, and that's what makes that noise. So, not to dispel the magic of that strange noise, but that's what it's from. And so that's something you can hear from a lot of different parts of the city. It's just kind of this, depending on where you are, it's like a kind of a backdrop. Yeah, you can sell. Fausto is the one who gets his hair cut at the very end. He's kind of like this, like, he looks older. Yeah. And Emilio is the one. His hair's not as gray yet, and yeah, that's the brother. I can't hear you. Yeah, I guess so. They both have passed on now. Emilio, the younger one, actually died first, probably because he's a chain smoker.
That was another part that reminded me of also John Cage making music out of noise with that film. Portrait of Inez, 1 minute film. It's a beautiful kind of portrait. How did you meet Inez?
Inez, I met when I was living in Valverde, this little town up near CalArts, and I would take a walk every day, and there's really just this one main road. So I would walk down the main road, and I kept passing this house, and there was a sign that said eggs for sale. And I saw these women sitting on their porch, and I just started talking to them, and one of them was Inez, and one was Inez's daughter. And I just got to know them a little bit as neighbors, and I bought eggs from them, and then I got really interested in Inez's story because she and her family are part of a historic Black community in that town that was able to buy property there when they couldn't in LA, other parts of LA. And she came from rural Louisiana, and she was just this very hardworking, but also just somebody who was really good, like had a green thumb and was always active. I mean, she was almost 90 when I made this film, so I think she's passed on by now. But yeah, she was just had a lot to say, and I just had a lot of character, so I always enjoyed talking to her.
Well, those are the questions I had. Does anyone want to jump in? Any questions for Nora? Yeah. I can also bring the mic.
Color. The black and white is so rich, the color is so vibrant. What's your preference? And then my other question is, what's next? What are you working on next?
It really depends on the film if I shoot it in black and white or color. But with Birds of a Feather, I knew it had to be in black and white from the beginning because, I mean, I'm sure all of you have been in these public parks in LA. They can look a little drab sometimes, especially when there's no people in them. And somehow shooting that film in black and white allowed me to just concentrate on the things I thought were interesting about it. There's a lot of shots in that film that I think if they were in color wouldn't work so well. And then same thing with something like Whales, like it was just such an angular, structural kind of film that it made more sense to me in black and white. And I shot a film in artist residency in Italy, in a tiny little village in the foothills of the Alps in 2022, and it's just waiting for me to edit. So that's my next thing. Yeah.
What was that Chanel cologne? Because I've been at a couple poker tables and casinos where people have that same exact
Oh, wow.
bottle of cologne as a totem, which is in poker like a good luck charm. Basically.
Oh, okay. Well,
So
then that
was
makes
he
sense.
wagering it? Was he a totem?
I mean, I have to tell you, I don't know, but the guy who was playing around with it, who was knocking it with his nail clipper and stuff, he was always doing something like that, you know? And so he was one of my favorite people to film because he was always just I just found in that film that it was a situation where older people become like kids. Not to say that they got immature, but they're playing a lot, you know? Both they're actually playing a game, but they're also just, I mean, I think it just comes from like the state of mind, like they're passing time, and so they find kind of quirky things to engage in sometimes. But that guy was one of the most offbeat. So I mean, maybe it was a totem. I'm not sure. That would make sense. But when I shot that scene, it was a day when I didn't have a translator, so I can't tell you for sure.
So my question is, for the Orange Grove, where was that filmed?
It was filmed in different places, but I mean, the actual place where people were working was in Santa Paula, or kind of the outskirts of Santa Paula, which is a small town off the 126, this old state route that goes between the 5 and the 101. But then there were a lot of the camera obscura scenes were shot in different places around that area, but still kind of in the vicinity of where the Orange Grove was.
What was the game that they were playing with the cards?
It's called 11. You just have to add up to 11 in the middle of the pile.
Anyone?
Could you explain the camera obscura process you used for the second film?
I used it for the second one and also for Sweet Oranges, so I, in Charlotte Price's class, Devices of Illusion at Cal Arts, she had us build a camera obscura on the first day out of foam core and it had a very simple lens on it and had like a piece of vellum at the back, and then there was a box that you you would make another box out of foam core to encase the vellum in. So once you would look out onto the world through it, that extra box created enough darkness that you could see whatever images were projected on the back of the vellum. And so I was just filming images projected onto the vellum, but I was using a time-lapse 16mm camera. So there's two things going on. Like one is that I'm looking through camera obscura, and the other is that I'm shooting time-lapse. So that's why there was all this strange interplay, and you actually kind of see the image breathing sometimes because I'm actually filming a piece of paper that does move in the wind. Like especially when I would set up a shot and it would take maybe 3 hours to finish.
When you're filming, you have some synchronous sound. Do you go back and do just sound recording without the camera? How do you do your sound?
Sometimes I'm lucky enough I have a friend with me who can just record when I'm filming, but I can't really use the sound I can, but if I record sound at the same time as I'm shooting, then you can hear the sound of the camera really loud. So I tend to use the recordings that don't have the camera sound, but I'm kind of creating a fake sync when I'm making my soundscape. So usually the sound you're hearing is the person that's appearing on screen, but maybe at a slightly different moment.
Other questions?
So, having known you when you were little,
This is my elementary school teacher who came up from San Diego on the train.
I'm surprised at your observation skills because you were always kind of an observer. But I'm wondering, when did you know you wanted to be a filmmaker?
I started getting interested in film in high school, but in college I took a documentary production class and the professor was a really incredible teacher, and the class I took with him really kind of helped push me in that direction. And I especially liked, I went to a smart liberal arts school called Oberlin, and it was great, but it was very much a bubble. And I really liked how working on the projects from that class got us out of that bubble when we went to go talk to people that were really living different lives than we were as college students. That's what got me going on it. And then I did a teaching fellowship in India after that, and I taught documentary filmmaking, which I had recently just learned about how to do. So that was a really good way to push me further into the process.
When I was watching your films, I noticed that there were like two different types of temporalities. One was related with landscape, especially because you had like that time lapse happening. But then you were filming humans, you generally went very slow on them. Like it was a different sense of time. And I was wondering if that's something that you thought about, or it just naturally occurred, or why apply two different types of temporalities in the filming to either landscape or humans? Question.
I think I'm always worried when I shoot landscape that there's not enough going on, which maybe sounds funny coming from CalArts, but I always find landscape is something I would rather shoot as a photograph than as a moving image, and so I think I'm still figuring out how do I want to shoot landscape. But with people, I'm always interested in what's happening because I'm really interested in people. So I think maybe a part of it is just I can watch people doing certain things all day, whereas landscape, I think I'd rather just be there in the landscape than watch a shot of it.
The portraiture that keeps coming out is nice, and is kind of on my mind with the relationships you have and spending like a year before even shooting Birds of a Feather. It seems like you sharing the sketches you were drawing of the guys at the table while you were there. The barbershop and like the tenderness, the humor of some of it, it just seems like there's a real relationship you build and a tribute that you pay to everyone, to Poncho, to looking at the camera. It's a long process of you shooting these, making them. Do the subjects, is everyone in any of the films, like, are they interested in seeing the finished film? Do they like get in touch with you? Because it seems like there's a lot that it takes to get them to open up. Curious what people have expressed to you about like what it means, what you're making with images.
Sometimes they're interested and sometimes they're not. The Armenian guys, I had one of my favorite screenings of all time at the community center that's at the park. I couldn't get all the guys to show up. Just to wrangle the few that I got to sit at the screening was kind of an effort, but it was great screening because they just were so, not they were apathetic, but they were just so unpretentious, and they really didn't know truly what I was doing until they saw that film, and then they thought, oh, this is what she's doing? And they didn't really analyze it, they just kind of said, okay, this is what she was doing, and that was it. It was very kind of like no frills. The Fausto and Emilio really enjoyed seeing the film. They I had a screening in Cincinnati that they were able to attend, and they were really happy with it. Some of the other people, I need to show them the films because some people kind of slip through my fingers a little bit. Like Poncho, I need to just go there and hopefully I can project the movie in the barn where the horses are and yeah, that would be the ideal situation. The teenage couple in the Concrete River, like I think they must have broken up or something because I texted them when I had a cut of the film and they never got back to me. So this is what happens sometimes. But Patrick could maybe say he's here. Patrick saw the film that he was just in. So that's an unusual situation that I have it that close. But it's not always easy to break. I think the time of shooting is there's like a lot of duration to the shooting time, and then keeping up the relationship with people afterwards is difficult sometimes. Yeah. Not to put you on the spot, but.
That's okay, that's okay. I don't know, it's nice to, we've gone to see each other a bunch, like, whether at weddings or like shows and things, so I think we do have like a friendship outside of, I'm capturing this moment and that's it. But it's beautiful to see, I think being able to see that and how you captured it brings me back personally to, that time where it was kind of fucking scary, like coming out of the pandemic and, everyone's starting to open up again and like actually see and interact with people. And I think that was one of the first shows that I played at, after the lockdown. And, you were able to capture like the joy, just being there in that moment. And then, the couple that was there and people exercising outside again and everything. It's, for me, it's very special to see. And, I don't cry that much, but I definitely felt, yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I think this is a good place to end, unless there's one more question. Is there one more? Yeah.
I know you're teaching now. Just wondering what you're in front of the new generation of filmmakers. What inspires how are they inspiring you, and what are the challenges you have to share your expertise with them?
I think they inspire me with their energy. Like some of my students are here today, and yeah, they are very fresh. They have a lot of energy. I think I'm kind of an old soul, so sometimes when I have to talk to the newer generation about technology and social media and that kind of stuff, I'm so close to a lot of those things that sometimes it's hard for us to find common ground. But I am happy that most of my students seem to be wanting to access things that are from the past. Most of the ones, at least, that want to be there are. So yeah, it's a process, but I enjoy teaching a lot, and I think generally when students want to be there, it can be a real joy to kind of like communicate with them about what is inspiring to me. But I think the main thing is just, there's a lot of students out there that they have to work, they have a lot of stresses, and that they don't have the freedom to like create the work that they maybe would want to make. So I hope that most of them could get more of those opportunities.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for coming.